Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the JD Tomlin History Channel, discovering and documenting the history of Northamptonshire. Today we're exploring one of the darkest chapters in Northamptonshire's past, the witch trials that gripped the county in the early 17th and 18th centuries. In 1612, 5 people from villages across the county were hanged together at Abington Gallows. Nearly a century later, in 1705, 2 more women met a grim end in Northampton. These weren't the famous Pendle witch trials of Lancashire that happened in the same year as the first Northampton cases. These were our local stories of fear, accusation, neighbour disputes and tragedy. Let's step back into a time when illness, misfortune and quarrels could be blamed on witchcraft, and justice often meant the gallows. By the early 1600s, belief in witchcraft was widespread across Europe and Britain. King James I, who had written a book on demonology, strengthened the laws. The Witchcraft Act of 1604 made it a capital offence not just to harm people through magic, but to practice it at all or even consult with spirits. Evidence in these trials often relied on devil marks, any unusual mole or teat that could be pricked without pain. They also relied on spectral evidence, that's visions or fits attributed to witches. They also relied on neighbour testimonies and crude tests like the water ordeal, binding and dunking someone. Floating meant guilt because water rejected the unholy. Northamptonshire, with its rural communities, poverty and outbreaks of disease, was fertile ground for such suspicions. Quarrels between neighbours, sudden illnesses in children or livestock, or a reputation for being ill-natured could quickly turn deadly. Firstly, let's look at the 1612 Northamptonshire witch trials. These trials took place at the Assizes held at Northampton Castle. A contemporary pamphlet, The Witches of Northamptonshire, printed in 1612, gives us the main account alongside court records. 5 people were convicted and hanged together on the 22nd of July 1612 at the Abington Gallows, believed to have stood at the crossroads in what is now Abington Park in Northampton. Here are their stories. Agnes Browne and her daughter Joan Vaughan or Browne from Guilsborough. Described as poor and quarrelsome, they were accused of bewitching a gentlewoman, Mistress Elizabeth Belcher, and her brother, Master William Avery. After a dispute, Joan allegedly responded rudely to being struck. Belcher fell into violent fits, crying out Joan's name. Avery tried to visit the Browns, but claimed an invisible force barred him. He too became ill. The pair blooded the accused women, scratching them to draw blood for temporary relief, but symptoms returned. On the way home in a coach, they reportedly saw 2 strangers on a black horse who cursed them, and their horses died instantly. Agnes was also linked to bewitching a child. Both pleaded not guilty, but were convicted. At the gallows, they reportedly cursed their condemners rather than praying. Arthur Bill of Raunds, the only man among the 5, so presumably a wizard rather than a witch, was supposedly the son of suspected witches. He was accused of bewitching a young woman, Martha Aspin, to her death, and his entire family underwent the water ordeal, hands and feet bound and thrown into deep water. They all floated, proving their guilt. Accounts differ on the fates of his parents, though. One suggests his mother slit her own throat in despair. Another that the father testified against his son after recovering from his bewitchment. Arthur maintained his innocence to the end, reportedly proclaiming the injustice of the law on the gallows. Helen Jenkenson of Thrapston. She was accused of bewitching cattle and a child to death. During investigation, she was pricked and a devil's mark was found. Her laundry was reportedly covered in images of toads and snakes and ugly creatures, which mysteriously vanished after she was threatened. She maintained her innocence throughout. And finally, Mary Barber of Stanwick, described in the pamphlet as having mean parents and living a monstrous and hideous life, she was accused of bewitching cattle and a man to death. Convicted on what the account calls good evidence. These cases often stemmed from personal feuds, unexplained sickness, and the power of suggestion in tightly knit communities. The 1612 trials are notable as one of the earliest recorded uses of water ordeal for torture for cases of witchcraft in England. They occurred in the same year as the more famous Pendle witch trials in Lancashire, part of a broader wave of persecution against supposed witches. Now we move on to the 1705 trials of Elinor and Mary Phillips. By the early 18th century, large-scale witch hunts were waning in England, but isolated cases still occurred amid lingering beliefs. In March 1705, Elinor Shaw, born in Cotterstock, and Mary Phillips, born in Oundle, were tried at the Northampton Assizes. A contemporary pamphlet, an account of the trials, examinations and condemnation of Elinor Shaw and Mary Phillips, and the births, educations and lives of the Northamptonshire witches, provide the details, attributed to a supposed witness, Ralph Davis. The women, described as poor and having fallen into dissolute habits, were accused of bewitching a woman and 2 children to death, tormenting them with fits and pains. They were also said to have made a jailer dance naked in the courtyard for a full hour through their powers. Other claims included destroying livestock and using imps or familiars, small demonic creatures. According to the accounts, they allegedly confessed to making a pact with the devil, appearing as a tall black man, signing in blood, and receiving imps in exchange for mischief. Evidence included victims' fits, wax figures or buried bottles with pins, and spectral testimony. They were convicted on the 7th of March 1705 and executed on the 17th of March 1705 at the Gallows in the north of Northampton, on the racecourse, where the racecourse is today, sort of opposite the White Elephant pub. Reports suggest that they were half hanged and then burnt at the stake while still alive, a particularly brutal end. They reportedly went to their deaths unrepentant or cursing, though one account says Shaw confessed to a minister at the end. Some historians have questioned whether the 1705 trial fully occurred as described, or if the pamphlets sensationalised or even fabricated elements for the public appetite, which was common with such tracts of the time. However, the overseer's accounts for St Giles Parish in Northampton contain a documented expense entry from 1705 for faggots of wood specifically brought for a public burning. Nevertheless, these pamphlets exist as historical documents today, and the executions are widely cited as among the last for witchcraft in Northamptonshire. Indeed, the late local historian Mike Ingram wrote in his 2020 book Northampton 5,000 Years of History that the executions may very well be the last executions for witchcraft to have taken place in England. In 1612, under James I's influence, fear was at a peak, and local disputes could easily escalate fatally. By 1705, on the other hand, while superstition persisted, legal and intellectual scepticism was growing. The last executions for witchcraft in England occurred around this period, and the laws were eventually repealed in the 1730s, though belief lingered longer in folklore, and indeed there are accounts up until the 1780s of women being thrown into ponds unofficially in these witch dunkings. These Northamptonshire cases highlight a common theme across witch trials: accusations disproportionately against the poor, marginalised, or those with reputations for quarrelling, and reliance on dubious evidence like floating in the water or insensitive marks, and the human tragedy of families torn apart and lives lost to fear rather than fact. But thankfully, in a few short years, the Enlightenment was to come, and with its focus on empirical evidence and facts rather than belief or superstition, things began to improve. There are no grand memorials, but the tales live on in local history books, pamphlets, preserved in archives, and discussions among historians. They serve as a stark reminder of how easily communities can turn on their own when superstition overrides reason. In our modern world, we can look back with a mixture of fascination and sorrow. Fascination at the beliefs of the time, and sorrow for the real people, mostly women but also men, whose lives ended on the gallows or at the stake because of accusation rather than proof. This brings us to the end of today's episode on the Witches of Northamptonshire. These stories are grim, but they are an important part of understanding our local past. If you've come across old stories, pamphlets, or even family legends about these cases, please drop a comment below. I'd love to see them. And please give the video a like if you found it interesting, and subscribe for more local history, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. As usual, I'll be putting some fascinating links about these events in the comments, including links to some out of publication manuscripts and old things that are preserved on the Internet Archive, and they can convey far more information than I can in a short video. Until next time, thanks for watching, and please stay curious about our shared past here in Northamptonshire. I'll see you next time.